Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of the Team Deakins Podcast, a collection of informal conversations between Roger and James Deakins and a guest. We never know where the conversation will take us, so listen in and see where it goes. This episode is sponsored by Aperture and its new Storm XT52, the industry's most powerful LED point source light. Brighter than a 6K HMI and powered by Aperture's revolutionary Blair light engine, the Storm XT52 is both a tunable white light and also the brightest ever adjustable color LED. Storm XT52, unrivaled output, only from Aperture. This episode is sponsored by HDR by Barco, where the magic of cinema reaches breathtaking heights with cutting-edge, high-dynamic range, HDR, laser projection. Don't miss the opportunity to immerse yourself in a spectacular world of deep shadows, dazzling highlights, and vibrant colors at select theaters near you. Buy your tickets, learn more, and experience extraordinary today. Visit hdrbybarco.com. Today, we're speaking with an actor. We've had the privilege of working with him on the Assassination of Jesse James and No Country for Old Men. His other credits include Raising Hope, Terminator, The Sarah Connor Chronicles, and The Dead Don't Hurt. We're happy to welcome Garret Dillahunt. Garret, hey. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, welcome.
I'm so happy to be here. I've missed you guys.
Let's start out with our question. How did you get to where you are today? Where did you grow up? Was this something you always dreamed of doing, or did you find this later in life? What's your story?
All right. Super honored to be here, first of all, and being a fan of the podcast and a listener. I knew this was the first question, and I was like, oh, no, we're going to start off on a downer. But please, it's not. It was a long time ago, and we all have these kinds of stories. But I never expected to be doing anything like this. I'm not. I'm a pretty shy person, and was painfully shy as a young man. I wanted to be a writer. I was kind of hotshot on the high school newspaper. A year young for my grade. I just kind of threw myself into that endeavor. I was painfully shy to get up in front of people. And I grew up in a small town called Yakima, but I went to a school which was closer to where we lived in a town called Selah, Washington, which was even smaller, about 5,000 people or so, one school. I'm the middle child of 3 boys. We moved a lot as kids. My father was in the trucking industry. My mother worked in retail, various retail jobs. And we followed the work, and we moved up to Washington to haul fruit. It's a big, fertile valley there where all your apples come from with a little Washington sticker. Yeah, my senior year of high school, I went on my first date. I wasn't a big hit with the ladies, and I finally had a date with this great girl, and we went to see Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones, the first one, and I came home that night, after having, put one shaky arm around a girl for the first time in my old 68 Oldsmobile on the drive home. And I'd pulled up into our yard, and there was a policeman there. It was about midnight. And apparently my older brother had been killed in a drunk driving accident.
Oh, God.
Oh, no.
Yeah. That was a long time ago. Mm-hmm. But it certainly threw my normal little family into a tailspin for quite some time. And it changed all of my plans. I went to college, and that was in November of 81, my senior year just started my senior year of high school. So it was a long time ago. But, I just had no will to do about anything at that moment.
Yeah.
I'm in college, I'm 17. And angry, and no one understands pain like I understand, which is a falsehood. Yeah. The young believe that they're the only ones who experience tragedy. But I have a degree in English with a writing emphasis for poetry, short fiction, and some journalism. And I thought, well, I should probably write plays as well, because it's hard to make a living as a journalist. Because it's so lucrative writing plays,
Yeah, really.
That's how naive I was. But part of that requirement, and this was my last year of college. I just kind of drifted through college, got in a lot of fights, and wasn't a great student. Just didn't understand. I just didn't know what life held. I didn't, I was now told that life was not guaranteed to us, and we could go at any moment. And I just knew I wanted to do something that I enjoyed, and something that kind of honored my brother in a weird way. He wanted to be a rock and roll musician. He played bass. In fact, he was on his way to a gig when they went off the road. Him and his buddy were both drunk. He was in the passenger seat. But part of the requirement for that double major was an acting class, so that you knew what you were writing for. And this was a mortifying development for me, because
For someone so shy.
I had no desire at all to get up in front of people and do that. So the first time up, doing the scene required in Drama 101 was a harrowing day. I don't think I slept much the night before. But it turns out that was just what I needed. It turns out to clearly have been a therapeutic endeavor for me. And I really, really enjoyed hiding in other people's skins and not being myself. I only think I realized this in retrospect many years later, but I just thought I found something I loved finally. And my trucker father and, working class mother were both surprised. What do you want to do?
Yeah.
But I threw myself into it. I was doing scene work for my own acting classes. I did scene work for the directors when they needed actors. I did scene work for the playwrights. I remember being up all night, just running from rehearsal to rehearsal all across campus, and I could not have been happier. I just loved it. And it was a habit that I think I was developing unbeknownst to myself as well. Just don't stop. Just go from one thing to the next. Keep running, keep hiding. Anyone but me was who I wanted to be. So, and then I'm out of school with a whole year of acting training under my belt. And found myself at loose ends in Seattle. I went to University of Washington for undergraduate work. And I worked around town for a year doing little plays. There was a real theater boom there at the time. I think there was something like 250 independent theater groups operating at one time. It was just a massive amount of creativity at play. But it quickly became apparent that I really didn't know what I was doing, and I needed some training. So I carpooled with about 4 other people down to San Francisco, where they were holding auditions for graduate schools. At that time, now I think you just do it online, or they audition everywhere. But at the time, they only met, like, large groups of schools would send representatives to New York, Chicago, San Francisco, and you had to get to one of those places to audition, and mine was San Francisco. And I had no money. I was working as a security guard at the time at a bank overnight. That's where I would practice my monologues and stuff. and I think I had 13 ready to go and a few songs, like as if anyone would. I really miss that work ethic, boy. But I crashed the auditions there. I didn't have money for the fees, because it costs money just to apply. $65 just to apply, and I just didn't have it. So whoever had an open slot and would see me, I would audition for. And some wouldn't, Juilliard and Yale, their slots were full, or they just didn't operate that way. But 3 or 4 did, and I got into a few schools, and one of them was NYU, the graduate acting program at NYU. And I chose it just because I'd never been east of Montana in my life. And it turns out to have been a very fortuitous decision for me. That seems to happen to me a lot, I think, just Mr. Magooing my way through this life. But I really benefited from that training, great people there at the time, and got out of school in 91. My first job was with Tim Blake Nelson was in it. I know you've spoken to him, and just a lot of really great actors that I'd been hearing about from other programs were all in this Carol Churchill production of Mad Forest. It was very successful. You know, we moved uptown.
Was it a play, a theater?
Yeah, sorry. It was
as opposed to
Carol Churchill play about the Romanian Revolution.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah. And it ran forever.
I must have missed that.
Yeah, it ran forever downtown and then moved uptown for a while. And it cemented a lot of friendships with some really talented people there, and set me on a road, I think, that I'm still on. You know, it's been a good one.
So did you do a lot of theater, though, in the beginning? And how did you make the switch over into film or television?
Well, I think because of why I started doing this, you know, I really didn't have any plan about a career. This was pure escapism for Garret and hiding out and therapy, you know. And so I never thought, you know, when you're young, you think, I'll sleep in a hallway. I don't care. I can sleep on stuff. This is all I need. Just this box and a play, you know. And I didn't have a plan for any furthering of my career. I just thought I would probably be doing plays forever. And I was happy about that. I just wanted to be not myself and do things that I was proud of. But then after a while, you get hungry. You know, I remember literally in my apartment in New York, I had this place that I rented for about $275 a month. Just a tiny space. Where the shower was, the walls were built to the sides of the bathtub. You know, that's how narrow that room was. And I think the bathtub was painted with like house paint, you know, white house paint.
Yeah.
And I didn't know where dinner was coming from. I've been doing plays nonstop for about 7 years. And you know how they pay. They don't pay well. And you sort of fall into the red and then dig yourself out. Then you're in the black, and then the play closes and you slowly fall into the red again. And Broadway and off-Broadway, all over the country, Steppenwolf. I did Tim Nelson's play at Seattle Rep. It was just great fun and it's a great thing to be young and a sort of footloose acting.
Yeah.
But I was hungry. I didn't have food in the cupboard, and I thought, I went outside and I was walking like literally not knowing where dinner was going to come from. And I ran into a school chum of mine, and he was like, "Oh man, you're doing so good. I saw that review in the Times," and I remember just staring at him and thinking, "Oh my God, I'm doing good? You know, I'm starving. You know, what am I going to, I got to mix this up a little better." And so that's when I started looking for film and television roles. I went to LA for my first pilot season, and back when there was pilot seasons, and there was a ton of stuff to audition for. And I got like 3 pilots in my first season out there. And I just thought, what have I been waiting for? They're just handing these things out. I wish I'd have been a little more selective, you know, in my choices sometimes. But I really, you know, I think my style's very well suited to film and television. I've always been accused of being too small, too filmic for a lot of theater work. And so I kind of felt right at home.
Yeah, well, how different was it, though? I was kind of interested, because when you do theatre, is it easier to put yourself into that character and disappear, like you were talking about earlier? But when you're doing TV or film, it's
you
like so different. With the crew, and it's in pieces. And how do you stay in character, the character you want to immerse yourself in, you know? Yeah.
Well, I can't say I was always successful at that, but neither was I on stage. You know, I think, you know, there's just as much distraction on stage. I mean, there's a live audience there that's crafting papers and, you know, doing all kinds of things to pull you out, you know, of this moment. But you just develop a focus, I suppose, and a technique to stay. And also for my part, and this isn't just blowing smoke, Roger, by the way, I listen to the podcast and I see when people try to steer it toward praising you and things you do, and you so deftly steer it right back on course.
Yes, right. Now, come on, keep on what you were talking about. You're
well
acting.
done, well done. But I was going to say, what really, I think I've been very fortunate with the camera ops and the DPs that I've worked for. A lot of DPs that I get to work with operate as well, like you do, and they're truly some of the best scene partners I've ever had, you know. And I loved photography, and apparently I'm a sort of a frustrated DOP and writer myself, because these things I have such admiration for are not things I do or know much about, it seems. But I really have always felt from Deadwood on, I think, just a real kinship with whoever's on that camera, and I can feel them wanting me to be good, contributing their own sort of motion to the dance, you know, and I feel, it makes me feel very secure, and I can tell when they think I'm doing a good job, you know, and it gives me a great encouragement. You know, I get a kick out of exciting the crew, you know.
I think it's really important, talking from my perspective as cinematographer, is creating that space where, you know, the actors feel comfortable.
And it always seems so odd, too, when the actor comes in and wants to pretend that no one else is there.
Yeah.
Which some do,
Yeah.
Val Kilmer.
Val Kilmer always wanted...
Very sweet, but, you know,
really,
why is that person in my eye line?
Well, he's trying to record you, trying to film you. Yeah. I've always wondered about that, and maybe this is a backdoor way to get you to say something about it, but, you know, do you feel that way? Like, help me out. You know, are you, I don't know what you see, but the good ones seem to see stuff that's happening often that others don't. And like, I remember sometimes you would slightly change a shot in Jesse James, or based on what you saw someone doing. Does it excite you, or is it, or does it make you, do you feel like you're having to hijack your own plan? And or does it?
No, excitement, really. I mean, it's, you know, it can be frustrating when you thought something through and then it changes, but then you've got to see, well, the whole thing is organic that way. That's what makes it exciting, is everybody's trying to find the best, aren't they, you know?
And there's definitely on set an excitement when you think you know the script so well and the actors come in and suddenly there's a whole new dimension to the script that you realize, yes, that makes sense. So it's really, actually really exciting to see it on its feed.
One actor we were working with when we first worked together, actually, the actor in the bar one night said, "I can't understand this film. What's going on? I thought this was a comedy. It's not funny at all." And we're going,
it wasn't a comedy.
It wasn't a comedy?
That must happen more often than you think, because it must be equally true that
probably does.
That you've filmed people who are like, okay, how am I going to salvage this, as opposed to take advantage of it, you know?
I don't know. I think that the thing is, I wanted to ask you, actually, like, we got things we want to ask and talk about, but what's it like doing something like where you're coming in to do a smaller role on a movie? I mean, and you're only really there for a few days to play a character.
And everybody else has been working for a couple of weeks. How do you become part of that? I mean, for me, I've seen that happen with actors and actresses coming on. I always make it a point to go up and talk to them because you realize that, you know, it can look like a closed system.
Yeah. Well, I've had bad experiences, you know, with that, and it's my own doing, you know. We'll talk about Jesse James later, because that was kind of an odd one. But the first thing that came to my mind was 12 Years a Slave. You know, I worked with Brad on Jesse James. And so they had reached out and said, would you be willing to play this part? And I don't know if it's been a good thing or a bad thing for me, but I've always tried to not care too much about the size of the role, and just tried to think about the quality of the project. And if it's something, great, I just want to be a part of it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember they reached out to my representatives and sent their script and said, Garret, be willing to play this part? And I was like, yes, immediately yes. You know, Steve McQueen, Sean Bobbitt. And at the time, Lupita Nyong'o had just graduated from Yale. And as is often the case, you know, the industry at first didn't know what to do with a Black woman, or especially a dark-skinned Black woman, you know. And my manager sort of snapped her up, and she had Lupita. And when I got that offer, she said, and do you have a patsy yet? And they were like, no, we've auditioned about 300 people, but we still... She said, well, I think I have her. And it was Lupita. So that's a huge role. And you know what happened then for her after that part.
Right.
And I came to set later. She'd been there a while. And I remember Dee, my manager, saying, okay, now look out for Lupita. This is her first movie. You know, check in. I showed up and I'm nervous. And she was like ruling the roost. And I said, I think Lupita's fine. Can you tell her to put in a word for me? You know?
Yeah, right.
But we showed up, and the first scene we're shooting is this scene where Chiwetel's character, Simon, has been whipped for not picking enough cotton. My character sort of, apparently there was a lot of poor white trash that would also pick cotton for low pay. I picked less cotton than anybody, but I wouldn't get whipped, my character, you know. And so I'm in the slave quarters, literally, you know, daubing alcohol on the whip marks on Chiwetel's back, complaining about my lot in life, that I can't believe I'm here, you know, picking cotton, like, you know, just, and they're all having to sort of bite their tongues. And that's my first scene. And I've showed up, and there's, you know, Fassbender and Chiwetel and Lupita's there, and the whole Plan B crew that I have a lot of affection for and want to impress. It's late. I've been waiting for a long time. They're running over. They're starting to cut things. And I haven't said a thing yet. They're starting to cut my scene. And I'm starting to think, oh, I've done something wrong. You know, I'm bad at this. And you're trying to find the vibe on set at 2 a.m., you know, so you can fit in. And I felt, you know, and Steve would come in and give me the strangest directions. You know, he ran in one time. And he was like, Garret, he sort of stutters when he's excited. You know, he says, you're prison, but you're not prison. You're prison, but you're not prison. It's a quality you have. And you look at me like he just dropped some amazing penny in the well and then run off. And I was thinking, like, does he mean me personally or the character? Or should I have that? Is this just an observation? Action! You know, and rather than say, I have the, you know, wherewithal to say, like, I don't understand what that meant. What are you saying? You know, or to get some clarification. I just kind of go with it and pretend. And I just felt like I was cocking up the whole thing. And I remember just being up the rest of the entire night, you know, walking in this field outside the hotel, smoking cigarettes, beating myself up about like, why didn't... And then I remembered, you know, he's a photographer. He doesn't necessarily know yet how to talk to actors. And the next day was a completely different story, you know, and then suddenly he's like, you know, I want you in every movie I do, and what would you like to play? And I know that I've spent a lot of my life, unfortunately, and maybe this will be a benefit to someone who listens to it, a lot of my career, I should say, feeling like, you know, I don't really belong here. You know, you don't want me. You don't want to hang out with me, or, you know, you start putting yourself in these boxes, and it's amazing to be as old as I am and as experienced as I am and still struggling with those kinds of demons, you know, and those kinds of things that happened on Looper as well. And it's really interesting how so a long answer to your question, it seems to take me about a day. And I need to mess up once to find my feet.
You mentioned Looper, and now I'm interested. What happened on Looper then?
Well, that also is a great DP there, Steve Yedlin, who you must have spoken to. Yeah. Something about the great DPs, and again, not blowing smoke, but I talk about you a lot, Roger, when you're not around. there's a calmness to them that just permeates the whole set. You might not really be calm, but you seem calm and you seem indefatigable. You know, you're also operating. You're just standing there, and I'm like, this guy. It's got at least.
You know, I should be an actor because it's not me behind that at all.
Very nervous.
Behind that is somebody that's actually as insecure, nervous, and shy as you were as a kid, I think. So yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Interesting, but no, that's good to know, because I suspect there's more of that than maybe both of us realize.
Yeah.
But we were shooting that on film, and it was another. Which I miss. Off topic, I know we had I don't know if you remember it. There was one time we ended up in the van going back to the hotel after a day of shooting on No Country. And this was sort of early in the digital phase of things. And I had this new digital camera. It was all about megapixels. You know, what's the megapixels?
Yeah.
And I was excited about it, but I was expressing concern because I missed shooting on film. I was like, I feel like this is going to ruin everything. And I was saying it partially, I think, because you were in the car, and I figured you probably felt this way too, because, you know, I've been watching your movies since, you know, Sid and Nancy, you know, and you were the opposite of what I expected. You were, you know, once again, you were sort of very calm, at least outwardly, and you expressed sort of excitement about the possibilities that it was presenting, that it, you know, that this could actually be a pretty wonderful thing. And it changed my whole sort of outlook on the future, at least in terms of digital photography. And but this one was on film. Looper was on film. And the atmosphere on set when it's shooting on film is so completely different, because everyone has to be ready. You know, the scenes were, you know, the special effects were practical. You know, when I fly into the air and all the items in the room fly into there, they're all on twine. They're all on lines. I'm on a harness. You know, there's nothing faked, and it's expensive if you mess up. You know, and I got to set, and there was Emily Blunt, who elevates any set she's on. I just think she's an extraordinary person and personality, funny and vivacious and talented and supportive and fun to look at, obviously. Joseph Gordon-Levitt was there, and once again, I'm feeling like, you know, I just got here. What's the vibe? Everyone really seems to be gelling well. I really want to impress Ryan, who kind of, you know, just called and asked me to do this. And I have my gun on Joseph, who's playing young Bruce Willis, you know, and and I go up. I just go completely up, and that's unusual, at least at the time, for me. You know, people used to think I had a photographic memory, and it's one of those things that happens on stage a lot, where, you know, I'm looking at Joseph and he's doing his acting, and then you can see him see that I've gone up, and there's a slight change. And then you can see him trying to find a way to help me out. And then finally they just yell cut, you know, and I'm just like, oh, you know, I did that. I caused that expense, that time. They've lost faith in me. It was the same thing. I just went up once, and I never did again. And I thought I was doing terrible work, and, you know, it's not bad when you look at it. Sometimes you think you're doing bad work, and it's really not that bad, but I clearly have a lot of issues, and I still do at 60 years old, feeling like I don't belong, or why am I not, you know, my penchant for playing supporting characters, which started early, has come back to sort of haunt me in a lot of ways, of feeling like I've done something wrong, or why don't I engender trust in people to be the guy. You know, it's a funny sort of self-flagellation thing that you do, you know, and then you think back and you see that you're the one who lined up all the pieces to make this happen this way. You know, it's interesting.
Yeah. You work with so many different directors. how does it differ when you're working with, Joel and Ethan as the pair, on No Country for Old Men, which was quite a large, important part, but you weren't there every day on the set.
Yeah.
And the same on Jesse James, really, with Andrew. Was that very different experience?
Oh, come on. That's definitely different.
That's why I'm asking you. It was for me.
I'm aware only in lore of the differences for you. But once again, I couldn't tell when I was on set. And I don't know why.
Good.
Only in this moment am I realizing, I know that those films were the same year, and I often talk about, like, I got to go from one film to the next with Roger Deakins. I mean, that was amazing. But if you remember in Jesse James, I was originally cast as Charlie.
Right.
And I had to change a TV conflict. Again, the fear thing coming back to bite you in the ass. If I could impart anything to anyone in any profession who might be listening to this, it's don't make decisions based on fear. And mine post-Deadwood was to grab the first thing that came along my way, which turned out to be something that completely messed up Jesse James for me. But very kindly, they gave me that other part, the Ed Miller part. So I was coming into Jesse James with a little bit of, dang it, I messed up, I've ruined everything. That could have been me or whatever. And on No Country, I read for Llewellyn from Moss several times. Every time, a more famous person would fall out, and I really wanted it. Tim Nelson recently told me, he was like, I remember when Joel and Ethan called me and they said, hey, that guy you recommended, he's really good, but he's not a leading man. He's a character actor. And he said this to me like you'll be pleased to know this. I think he saw my face of like, oh, clearly I've been thinking the wrong thing about myself for 40 years. And he said, oh, I think that's a compliment. But so it was two films back to back where I was kind of coming in feeling like, oh, this was a consolation prize, these roles. But what great experiences, and how wonderful to have been included in them both for me. And as far as Joel and Ethan, I've never worked with them since. I would love to. It's just I can't imagine anything in any of their movies that I would have played. But what's wild about them is I felt very in control of my performance. I felt like organically, I think I'll go here and then I'll probably do this. And they would always walk up in tandem and say, well, that seemed pretty good. And they're kind of towing rocks. And like, what do you think? You want to go again?
Yeah, right.
They don't really have much to say other than, do you want to go again? I'm like, yeah, let's do one more. Okay, let's go again. And then they walk back.
Yeah.
And then you see what you shot and you see the storyboard and it's exactly the same. And I'm like, how did they trick me into doing that?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I've talked about that a lot. And every film I work with them on,
it's the same.
It happened like that.
Wow.
And they would never show the actors the storyboard.
Yeah.
But after a while, the whole rehearsal would, you might sometimes start out and think, oh, this is very different. But then after a few rehearsals, no, it would be exactly that. I'd look at the boards and think, my God, that's exactly the same blocking.
We don't know how they do it. Because they'll also be working with actors that are notorious for wanting to change everything.
Yeah.
And yet, at the end, it's the storyboard.
It's really sort of
very
amazing. I mean, is it the same for you? Like, or do you design the storyboard?
I usually work. I mean, sometimes work with them at the beginning, especially early on Barton Fink, but later on I just go through the storyboards with them when we got locations or as we got locations. So, they were all part of the planning. Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
But it was also really interesting. Yeah, it's also really interesting on No Country because I think you're quite a different actor maybe in your approach to Tommy Lee. Certainly, it's a very different character, but both of you still kind of ended up doing exactly what was in the storyboard.
It's amazing. Yeah, I was glad he liked me.
Yeah, yeah,
Really?
yeah. It can be very intimidating. I remember. I tell a story now.
Yeah.
Where before the shoot started, we had Josh and Tommy Lee and the Coens and myself and that we had dinner one evening to get everybody to meet up. Yeah, that's right. You were there. Yeah, it was really funny because Tommy Lee really laid into Josh. I think he was just trying to test him out. You know, it was really funny.
Wow.
Anyway. He's kind of like
Yeah,
that.
he told me, he said, I always kind of thought Moss was more like, was long and lean, like a coyote, you know? But yeah.
Well, the other story is Josh had, who did he have make a tape for him? He did an audition tape that...
Was it Quentin?
Quentin Tarantino did with him. This audition tape, and they sent it to Joel and Ethan, and Joel said, yeah, we never liked it. We didn't, you know. It was only until they saw him later on they decided on Josh. You know, it's very strange.
That's amazing. That makes me feel better that I don't have friends like Quentin Tarantino laying down tapes for me. Wow.
Yeah. How much for that part in No Country? I mean, how much rehearsal did you do with Joel and Ethan beforehand?
I don't remember a ton of rehearsal. Yeah. Other than on the day, we had that. Yeah. I don't know if you remember this, but they had this whole thing before we started shooting where they would get together with everybody in like the hotel conference room and just kind of go through all the scenes that they were in.
Yeah.
And me and Tommy did that. That was day one of my arrival in Santa Fe. I think we were staying. And, you know, I guess I'll tell this story. It doesn't matter. You know, we went to this conference room, and, you know, the hotel doesn't know what we do. So they've laid out, it's like a business meeting. They have pads of paper and pencils and pitchers of water and dishes of these little individually wrapped candies, little colorful cellophane. And it's just me, Tommy, and the Coens in this room. And I'm nervous. I mean, my heart's just beating out of my chest. I'm the only one in the room without an Oscar. You know, so I'm just like, whoa, I can't believe I'm here. And we're reading through the scenes, you know, and I don't know, I'm just reading randomly from a book as if this is the script of No Country. And you know, Tommy's reading his lines, you know, I read my lines, and they'll say, like, well, any questions on this scene? And if we did, we'd talk about it. If we didn't, we'd move on. And during this whole time, you know, Joel is kicked back. He's got his legs crossed a little away from the table, and he's eating these candies, you know, just slowly crinkling them and eating them. Do you know this story?
No, I don't. I'm just imagining him, though. You
know, and he's kind of, you know, he's got his head cocked to the side, and he's listening to us, and crinkle, 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 you know, eat. And Tommy's reading, and he'll say, like, this isn't a line, it's just some words in front of you. He'll be like, well, Mr. Rome becomes a Western, says, of course. He gets up, grabs the dish of candy in front of Joel. He doesn't make eye contact with him or anyone, walks across the room, puts it down, sits back down, and resumes right where he left off. And Joel is sitting there, like, frozen in air. You know, he starts to, you see him get really red. This is day one. My heart is pounding out of my, I'm sure he's visible. And he finally says, was that bugging you, Tommy? And without looking up, Tommy says, they really do. Whereas the combination of corporate and personal, you know, just right back to the lines. And I was just like, oh my God, this is going to be some kind of shoot. But thankfully, you know, he likes me. You know, I feel like I can work with just about anybody. I know what I'm doing, and I think he just doesn't suffer fools. But his definition of fool is a real wide umbrella. You know.
Yeah, he would test me out as well, different ways, but and test everybody. But it was actually one of the most pleasant shoots, I think, in terms of everybody getting on that I've been on. Yeah,
in that big scene where we're riding the horses around the crime scene for the first time, you know.
Yeah,
I could tell that he was pleased I could ride, but when it was my coverage. You know, and he's off, and he's just sort of spouting his lines, and he's standing by the pickup truck. Joel and Ethan are directing me, and at one point Tommy goes like this while he's giving me his lines. He holds up his hands and he goes like this, meaning my toes were out too far. Put my toes in closer to the horse. And I appreciated it, but I also felt like, I've got 3 directors on this scene.
Yeah, right.
On this shoot.
That's funny.
But I sure enjoyed myself on that.
Yeah, I think everybody did. Well, I usually do on their films, yeah.
So the assassination of Jesse James was quite different than that.
Well, I was thinking it different because I was thinking the scene up in the woods prior to the train robbery, where you're all sitting around. I remember very distinctly because the sun was going down and I wanted to shoot it with the sun in the back of the shot, and it was going down, and Andrew was saying, well, let's ad-lib something. I don't know what was happening, but it seemed like the whole scene became ad-lib. Do you remember that?
I do. I think he had prepped Paul Schneider, who's a pretty good writer.
Right.
And Paul kind of wrote these little scenes for us where we're talking about whores and poetry,
Right.
Yeah.
Which I don't think Ron Hansen was a big fan of, but it was a cool scene. Do you remember was this your idea, that the makeup they put on us that had like crushed up pearl in it so that we were a little bit luminescent?
No, that was Andrew had seen these photographs that I think a Canadian photographer had taken, a fashion photographer, that makes the skin kind of slightly, metallic. So he wanted to use that, but that was really for the night shots.
Yeah.
But, I think he started using it early on, but it didn't really work on the daytime shots. But we did use it on the night shots, didn't we, I think?
And there's something about that guy who, I was a big fan of Chopper. And and my scenes, particularly the one in the cabin with Brad, where it was freezing cold that day, he just was so pleased or surprised by things I was coming up with or something, which I attribute a lot to Brad, who was, I think, an amazing scene partner. He just doesn't, for someone as big a star as he doesn't seem to have much ego, at least on set. I don't know him off set, but and Andrew would come in, he's like, everything you're doing is better than what I'm telling you, so just keep going. And so my experience with him was more of, this is a guy who seems like a real artist. He takes years between projects, is sometimes doesn't have 2 nickels to rub together. He's so picky. And seems to be able to hold the vision of it in his head against all chaos. And he, was willing to hire this pretty unknown fellow to play Charlie Ford, which Sam eventually played because of the TV conflict. But, that went a long way for me to probably be a lot more forgiving, because
I think he's an obsessive genius. But it can be just frustrating sometimes. The scene you're talking about in that little hut was going to be on location, but I don't know if you remember, it was snowed under the day we went there.
Right.
And we tried to dig it out, and it was just impossible because it was just impossible to shoot that. So they nixed it, shooting that on that day, and we did something else. And we shot it the next day, I think it was, in a warehouse. They put the set in the warehouse, and I had the painter paint a backing to look like the landscape outside, and we lit it, and nobody's ever questioned whether that was a set or not, on stage. So. But Andrew was very frustrated by things like that, but it was like, you're kind of trying to make the best of it within the terms of the schedule and the budget and everything else.
His people skills could improve.
It could a little bit. But I mean, I love the guy, honestly. Yeah. I mean, I think he's a total genius, but it's, a lot of times on films.
Genius can be frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the times you're kind of you're butting heads with somebody because you're both trying to get it as good as you think it can be in your own way.
Right.
So,
Well, I had such a ball with you on that, and I loved that scene in the room, and you were the third scene partner in there, and I really, there's something about you that makes makes me, and I suspect other actors, just really want to perform. They want to perform well, because Roger will get it,
That was a great scene. I mean, it was really...
They were all great scenes, weren't it?
But maybe
and then you get the thing.
And then was No Country following that or previous? I forget.
It was
followed
that.
Because Jesse James was like 18 months in the cutting room.
Yeah, or 2 years.
Yeah. Or 2 years.
Yeah, what a palate cleanser for you. And really, one of the best adaptations, I think, of a book I've ever seen, No Country.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I think there's a line in the book, when Moss finds the money, and the guys, you just see that boot on the other side of the tree, sort of skylined and silhouetted. It's small, but we all know what it is and what's going on. And I think in the book, it describes the guy as being slumped over almost to the ground as if he was examining something very small. And I felt like that's exactly what we saw there. It's really, what a good time.
Yeah. I've been very lucky.
And then you also did it Against the Sun.
Yeah, that's kind of really interesting because it's a very similar film to Unbroken, what we worked on with Angelina Jolie.
Oh, yeah.
And
we could have used you on it.
It's probably a shame, though, it was on the same year because kind of one had a bit more publicity behind it.
Yeah, and more money behind it, sure. It's a true story. It wasn't like like Deadwood for me was a really formative experience and launched my entire career and taste, I think, in the kinds of things I wanted to do. And I think that was ambitious. It was one of the most fun times I've had on set, even if it's not necessarily one of the most successful films I've ever done. But I really loved the whole... We shot it in Mexico. We were down in the same tanks at Fox Studios that they used for Titanic. Which were aging at the time then, but just an amazing piece of technology. And I loved being in the water all day, and the wave machines and the tanks for the storms was just so much fun. And really the camaraderie on that was my favorite part. The Mexican crews were great. Director was super prepared, if underfunded. But we had to lose weight for this. We lost 1 pound a day.
Yeah.
For 21 days.
Wow.
Yeah. And we were on a diet, and we ate 5 meals a day that were prepared for us. We had this chef, and we took all our meals together. And boy, it just changed everything for me in terms of food and the importance of eating together, because we were super hungry for a while, but every 3 hours they would stop and we'd eat a meal. And that could be a little tub of Jell-O with 2 blueberries in it. That was a meal. And then 3 hours later, the chef would make us lunch, the biggest meal of the day. The last meal of the day is like a cactus shake or something that tasted horrible, but just something to keep the metabolism firing so we'd keep losing weight. But what I really loved after about 2 weeks, is how much we loved eating together. And how delicious the food was. Like we would sit and we would talk about everything because our phones didn't work there. We just was not a good reception areas, and we were in another country. So we had no choice but to be just with each other. And every bite was so delicious. We were just like, did you taste that blueberry and that Jell-O? Oh my, that was amazing. It was just so much fun. But
that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
when we did Unbroken, the guys up to Christmas, they had to lose weight, and most of them did, and stayed on the
certain
diet.
Person they used digital techniques to enhance it.
But it was actually really upsetting on the set to see people withering away, kind of.
Yeah.
And they went away for Christmas and came back, and the ones that had been on the diet, when I saw them, I was so happy because they looked normal, and I went up and I hugged them. I said, I'm so glad you guys are okay. So it was a big deal.
It's a weird thing, and you hear so many stories from other actors or who've had to lose a lot of weight, and then it's kind of wrecked their bodies forever in some ways. And
Yeah.
I've never had to do anything that drastic, but boy, I sure enjoy.
But it sounds like you guys were doing it right.
Yeah,
You were doing it
so.
scientifically.
We had a nutritionist, and it's basically the diet that they put severely obese people on before surgery.
Great.
So,
Great.
Yeah.
Great to know. Jello and blueberries. Okay.
I remember Matt Damon in one of his first large roles had to do it on Courage Under Fire.
Yeah, but
he looked like death.
Yeah, was really, it was scary. Yeah.
He said it took him quite a while after that to get himself back to normal. Yeah.
It's funny how that happens, isn't it? I kind of miss, in a way, those opportunities, but we've also just gotten better at doing it healthily, I suppose.
On CG. I mean, how do you feel now? I mean, what you talk about Deadwood. I mean, what was it about Deadwood that was so significant for you as an actor?
Well, we touched on it in a lot of ways, talking about, you know, how you feel if something great is happening and you're capturing it, and how you might go like, well, I should maybe do this, and you know, just based on what you're seeing, you know, maybe like Andrew Dominic, you know, a lot of ways, but David Milch, I think, is a genius that really set the tone for me in terms of what I was going to be looking for the rest of my career. You know, the kinds of things I wanted to do. And I'm sure he could be a lot to deal with in the writer's room, but I wasn't in the writer's room. I was out front, and every day he'd come out with pages literally hot from the press, because there was never a script done before. After the first 2 or 3 episodes, there was never a table read. They just weren't done. There was no scripts done. He was writing as he went, and he was writing based on what he saw, or he would talk to you, and then you realize he'd worked parts of you into the characters, and you're like, what is this guy, my shrink? You know, where is he getting this? But what I loved the most on that set was, I mean, I've always been an ensemble guy, and I think that's the theater talking in me. That's just how it goes. One day you're the prince, one day you're the pauper. But he would come and he'd set the scene every day before we shot in the most poetic way. And we were always wrong about what the scene was about. I think his favorite author is Melville, who said something like, the best scenes are always about the opposite of what they appear to be about. And it was true with him. You know, the rivers of subtext under the dialogue, which is such fun to play. The crew knew they were making something special. The DP of the first couple of years was Jim Glennon. He would pass away, unfortunately. And Joe Gallagher took over, who I also loved. He was a camera operator, and I think he started DPing on Deadwood. I'm not sure of that, but also very gifted. But both of them were malleable in this way, in that they would see that there was just a whirlpool of creativity around the scene where everyone felt contributive and involved. And if I would do something that David liked, he'd say, yeah. Now say this, you know, because he saw something that you did that excited him, and then he made the dialogue fit that even better. And then Joe or Jim would say, well, if he's going to do that, then we should maybe shoot it from this angle so that you can see this thing behind it. And everybody's just firing and knowing that they're making something kind of special. You know, it's the only job I've ever had where actors came on their day off just to watch. You know, they just wanted to watch. They just wanted to be there. And I was talking with Tim Oliphant about it when we all reunited to do the Deadwood movie, and I snuck in some tiny part. How it kind of ruined every other job for us, because we've been looking for that experience pretty much on everything else, and sometimes to our detriment and the detriment of whatever project we're on, we try to make the new project that, and then we're sort of the pain in the ass actor. But you know, look, I got to play 2 characters on that show. You know, it gave me a reputation, deserved or not, that I can do anything, and it gave me a career. You know, his faith in me.
But isn't it difficult? I mean, in a movie, you know where it's going and you know where the end is. But if you don't know what's happening until the day, how do you deal with that? I mean,
Yeah.
I guess he's overseeing it to make sure that it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right. He's kind of an improvisational kind of figure, and you know, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. You know, Deadwood could never happen today. You know, what made it special killed it. We took 21 days to shoot an episode one time. I mean, 21 days.
Whoops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, there's no way anyone's going to sign off on stuff like that anymore, you know, and it was lucky that they signed off as long as they did on this. And I know that was a lot of trouble for some of the actors, especially some of the older actors, you know, who really wanted time to prepare and weren't used to this sort of, all you need to do is know your character, and then here's the lines. And sometimes he wrote in blank verse. I mean, he wrote, there's a beat to this stuff. It's amazing. And I have to have a thesaurus nearby sometimes. Like, what is that word? But somehow it all made sense. Like when the writing is so good, and I found that I could commit great chunks of dialogue, you know, particularly for the second character I played, who was this sort of, you know, murderous, you know, sexually depraved geologist, advanced man for Hearst, you know, and he spoke in like massive poetic monologues, and I find I could commit them to memory almost instantly because it just made sense. But I don't know if I would feel the same today. You know, I sometimes think of the times I've been a little pissy on sets, and I'm like, well, that sounds like Deadwood. That sounds like I would have had a real problem now. Like, wait, this is insane. Like, I need to know what I'm doing the night before. This, you know, but to a young man, you know, who didn't know that the pay was bad and that this wasn't normal, you know, this was heaven. This was, you know, I felt needed. You know, they're asking a lot of us, and kind of like, you know, my struggles with being limited to supporting parts. Sometimes I thrive with responsibility. I want it, and that was heaped on us, you know, every day. You would have been great on that, Roger. Oh my God, you'd have been exhausted.
Good series too. Yeah. Well, how about you talk about how different it is now? I mean, that wouldn't be made now. What is it like now? I mean, you've been on Fear of the Walking Dead for 41 episodes.
Yeah.
I mean, how different was that then?
Well, I didn't have a great time on that. In fact, I managed to get out of my contract on that and move on. I just felt like I didn't have time left in my life to do something I wasn't super enjoying, even though the character was an amazing one. And I think a lot of your guests have touched on the speed with which things are done now. It's just not conducive to that kind of creativity, you know. But I think what might help, the thing that bugs me the most, the three words I hate the most on set are just in case. Well, just in case.
Yeah.
You know, because I often feel like we just kind of shoot everything. Like we're going to shoot this, and this. Move on, this, and then I'll pick later what I want. And that makes me feel completely out of control of my performance, which, you know, we kind of are anyway, but, you know, I have the illusion that I have some control. But also it just seems fearful and lazy, and it's exhausting to cast and crew alike. You know, I much prefer how the Coens do things, you know, that they know what they want and they get that and they move on. You know, that they've crafted the story, and that gives me confidence in them. That gives me confidence in the project, and I know what I have to fill, you know.
And also, when they do some coverage, they're not doing the entire scene because they're not going to use it for the entire scene.
Right.
You don't have to go over it again and again.
Right.
You're doing it for what that shot is good for.
I mean, I probably shouldn't mention too many, but sometimes it's kind of odd when you're running the camera for 5 minutes on a blank wall before an actor opens a door.
Yeah.
It's kind of strange. But
do you butt up against that a lot too, in your side of things? This sort of.
I've been very lucky, the directors I work with, but there's been occasions in the past where you think that's, you know,
like we've got it. We don't need all of that.
Yeah, I mean, first working with Joel and Ethan, they wouldn't even, if they had a wide shot for a scene, they wanted it for a certain part of the scene. That's all they'd shoot. They wouldn't shoot the rest of the scene.
Yeah.
I mean, it was different in later years. They would kind of let it roll on for the actors more. But I think maybe it was...
Generally is for the actors.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They're
happens,
quite happy.
yeah.
They know they want that wide shot for this particular beat, these few lines, and that's what they would do.
Yeah. It's interesting. I directed one thing, one episode of television. It was a show I was on, and like when actors become directors or editors become directors or DPs become, there's kind of characteristics that each of them always bring,
Yeah.
and actors tend to bring, because we all think like, I'll show you how it's done. It doesn't need to be this hard. Come on. And we're going to do this in a oneer. We love oneers, like that's all you need. The whole story's
Theater.
told, and we're amazing. And I had one of those. This was my favorite scene, and it was a great scene, but I had no coverage. I had no coverage in it. I didn't think we needed it. But then we had a time problem. So then what had to go was that entire scene, because I had nothing to cut to. There was no way to shorten it, no way to keep it,
Yeah.
So I had to cut out one actor's entire performance, was never seen, because that was her only scene. And I was like, this is the know-it-all who thought he knew better and knew, I'm amazed still to this day how many, the facets of all the different jobs that I'm just completely unaware of still. They're still mysterious to me. And it's great to be put in a position where you kind of learn a little bit about that, and you're like, oh, guess I don't know everything,
Well, I do think it's a mystery how one film turns out to be so great, and it's just the mystery of the collaboration and the chemistry between all the people, not just the actors, but everybody behind the craft services who are giving you your Jello down in Rosarito. I mean, it's all part of the thing that creates the final thing.
I think I've fallen away a little from the sort of, I guess I'll call it the spiritual side of filmmaking that I think I've undervalued some. And as I look at and try to prepare myself, I guess is the phrase, for this last third, and try to decide what is it I want to do? What do I want to accomplish here? Because you're simultaneously learning that it's all kind of silly, but also you want to leave something of note. I don't have any children. I don't have any. What have I done that's of value? And it all comes back, I think, to what you just said. There's the best experiences and the best product always comes from a real collaboration of a massive amount of people, and that's magic and can't be undervalued. A great script helps, but if everybody's on board and there's not some, asshole mucking up the works, you can make something great, I don't know how you feel about that side of things, but I'm starting to think I've undervalued it.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I guess that's the way I've always seen it, and that's why I've always had a problem with what you were just talking about just in case, let's shoot 5 cameras and shoot everything and making in the edit.
Yeah.
And that's also why I have a problem with the way technology has seemed to have taken over the story.
Yeah.
It's almost a substitute now, the way flashy camera moves and lighting and action sequences. And I don't know where the stories have gone,
Yeah.
I mean, we were watching the other day Winter's Bone, which you're in. We were watching it because we're going to talk to Deborah about it. And you just look at that, how wonderful it is, how real it is, how obviously there's no money behind it, but it doesn't matter because it's got so much passion.
Yeah.
And you can tell there's something, everybody's trying to do something really special, and they achieved it.
Yeah. Has it always been that way? Do you think? I know like Johnny Weissmuller was Tarzan, and I wonder if actors in the day were like, "What, that guy? He's a swimmer. You can't."
Well,
He's not
yeah,
an
they
actor."
probably were. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it still made more money than the great movies of the day. But it is frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking too. There was a time I thought I wanted to be an animator. And so I always enjoy seeing. And I had gone to see one of the How to Train Your Dragon movies.
Oh, yeah.
Alone, so weird, old guy in the theater with a bunch of children, but I'm just like, this is amazing. And it was the second or third one, I can't remember which, but the shots were just amazing. There was one scene where he's riding his dragon sort of just above the clouds, and right next to the clouds, that staff sort of appears.
Oh, yeah.
And then the woman standing with the staff. And it was the most amazing shot. And I was like, I don't know what to call this, but who DP'd this? And then your name was at the end. And I was like, of course.
Well, I can't take credit for shots like that. But I mean, well, we were involved from the beginning with Dean on all three of them. That was a really great experience, actually. Yeah. But again, it's just storytelling and using images and camera movement and
And that's different than the technology that you're talking about, isn't it? That's not.
Yeah. It's using it in a different way. I'm talking about shooting on a volume or there's something about being in a real world and not reacting to things that are happening rather than just doing it like.
Yeah, I mean, if it's possible to do it in camera, it's such a better experience.
I remember on the pilot of Deadwood, Walter Hill directed that, and it was and the sky was darkening. It was not what the scene was written for. It looked like it might storm any second, and everyone was freaking out. It was like the sky was falling, just chickens running all over the place, and Walter was just like, boom. He was just sitting there, and he was like, "Oh no. What will we ever do?" Because he knew that this is an opportunity more than a problem.
Yeah.
There was a windy day on a funeral scene in Deadwood, and it was just destroying us just for this funeral. And this was not the plan. And then David was like, newspaper man, you're allergic to dust, and it became and he's sneezing throughout the whole thing, sometimes so hard his bowler hat falls off. We're all kind of dealing with this dust now, and it's like suddenly it's almost comedic. It's this sad, we're trying to lay this boy to rest, and it's a dust storm, but we're not pretending it didn't happen. We didn't reschedule the day. It was just like it became something better and something just by dealing with what was happening. But I'm with you, man. I'm with you. I think that's the way to go. Anyway,
what would I just want to ask? What advice would you give to somebody starting out? What advice would you give to you yourself? When you started in the 80s.
Well, that might be doable because I think like a lot of my counterparts or peers right now, I don't know how to help young actors. I don't know what to tell them from my experience that even applies to this new, hopefully temporary world. I only have to have faith in them that they will find their way because this is normal to them. I hope the stories survive. I hope there's still a passion for stories because I just see a lot of people who want to do anything and they'll do anything. And that's the world they're living in because they have so many fewer choices than I did. And it was a struggle for me. But I think I would have, when I was a security guard and I read this book called Blessings in Disguise by Alec Guinness. And it made an impression on me. It was his autobiography. And it was about a life lived downstage right or upstage right instead of downstage center. And the great joy he had being able to disappear into all these different characters. And I just found that so enchanting a prospect and launched myself down that path with the power of that thought, But I think I would, if I could tell myself something early on and really make myself believe it, I think it would be that, you belong here. You know, you are not an outsider, and there's no reason you can't be whichever thing you want to be here, you know, if you put in the work. So I think I would have benefited greatly from that. And also keep your monthly nut low.
I think that's good for anyone. Yeah.
Yeah. Or stay hungry.
Yeah. Yes, sir. What a pleasure
Well, thank
talking
you for
to
doing
you.
this.
Very
This has
good.
been
It's been
great.
wonderful.
What a pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you. We get
Great.
wonderful guests like you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you,
It's
Garret.
the best.
pleasure.
This has been great.
All right.
Thanks. If you'd like to sponsor the Team Deakins podcast, let us know at pod@teamdeakins.com. Thanks for listening. If you want more information and further discussion, check out the forums at www.rogerdeakins.com. Becoming a member is free, and you can ask follow-up questions there. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more new questions and topics. Also, check us out on Instagram at team.deakins. See you next time.